You don't have to be Kevin Costner to know there's something going on with the weather this year. Of course, it's a little inconvenient for some, but you should wake up even if you're Kevin Costner.
The worst flooding in decades has already affected more than 37 million people across China in the summer of 2020.
Climate scientists have been saying for decades now that as we burn fossil fuels, carbon dioxide and other gases, but mostly carbon dioxide, ends up in the upper atmosphere, which causes more entrapment of solar radiation heat energy as it hits us from our sun. Our sun is called Sol. However, as that heating occurs, we also lose ice coverage in the Antarctic and the Arctic, but principally the Arctic, because the Arctic ice is mostly on water, except for parts of Greenland and a few Canadian islands, sorry Denmark. And that actually allows more heat energy not to be reflected back out of the planet at the top of the bottom of the earth, and that's kind of a bad idea because that causes more heating, and also the melting causes more water vapor to go into the atmosphere, which is also a bad idea because that also further causes a cycle of heat entrapment. And as this continues onwards, what would happen is that the permafrost in Siberia and Canada and parts of America called Alaska, which is really Russian, would melt, and they would actually liberate methane into the atmosphere, which would cause a further entrapment of energy, which would cause a further heating. A cyclical unbalance that's not natural. Of course, the Earth has been hotter in the past and colder in the past than it is right now. We've been living in a real sweet spot for human life forms for the last 20 to 1,000 years or so, and that's been really cool. We've managed to do a whole bunch of wonderful things with that. But the question is, if you do not think that human-caused climate change is real, are you prepared anyway in case it is? And that's one of the major questions. I felt we had a longer time scale than it appears that we do have before personally I would be directly affected by climate change. That no longer appears true. But what has been going on with China? Let's go back to China and listen to them and their view of what's going on. And I will interject with my opinions and thoughts as and when I feel like it. Remember, I am not a climate change scientist, nor am I an atmospheric chemist. I am merely a soon-to-be retired nurse.
The flooding started in the nation's south, with the Guangxi Zhuang Autonomous Region and Guizhou Province becoming inundated in early June. By July 19th, heavy rains had been pounding 27 of China's 31 directly administered provinces. Rising water levels along the Yangtze River have battered cities and villages in dozens of provinces along Asia's waterway. As of mid-July, more than 140 people were reported dead or missing because of the floods.
So there was pretty clear indication that severe flash flooding was possible in the areas that were then, later on after the 16th of July, hit by flash floods. And that's true in pretty much any scenario I can think of this year. The flash flooding is a shock and it comes out of nowhere and it's very destructive and very rapid. But if you're aware of various factors like rainfall upstream, if you're aware of those sorts of things, it is possible to go, I think the risk is quite high. Maybe it's time to seek higher ground.
The economic loss caused by the torrential rains is estimated at about 86 billion yuan, equivalent to around 12.3 billion US dollars.
Of course, our system makes no costing for the emotional loss of people and stuff and possessions, which I think is actually critical for the individual to take on board. It's not just the cost of finding a new home and finding new furniture and carpets and trying to deal with all this stuff and not being able to go to work because your workplace has been destroyed. There's actually a huge human, spiritual and emotional cost to be involved in a flash flood. So what we should do is try and avoid them at all costs, either personally by fleeing or trying to mitigate very, very well where we are, or by encouraging our governments to do something about it. But I'm not altogether sure that that tactic will work.
So why are the floods so severe in China this year?
Well, it's not because China has a special weapons laboratory funded by Fauci and they had an accident and accidentally released a lot of rain. No, it's quite simple. They had a lot more rainfall in areas of China this year than they normally do, which over the period of time allowed the water to actually become flash flooding. It's that simple. There was too much rain, it couldn't escape where it was being held fast enough, so it overran the normal ways it has of getting out to the sea. Rain, water, fall, river, sea. That's how it works. And when that system gets a little bit out of balance, as we're seeing right now in Utah...
Well, crap. It started raining again.
Well, it sure is coming down. Take a look at the storm rolling through Cedar City earlier today.
Flooding in the Ashdown Forest neighborhood of Cedar City.
This video shows the power of all that rain. Jesse Harris recorded this as he drove home. He estimates it had only been raining for about 10 minutes.
You can have prolonged droughts for a long period causing huge problems and massive reservoirs and lakes just shrinking down quite quickly. But when the rain in the supersaturated water atmosphere drops, it drops like a ton of bricks.
According to meteorologist Yonglan Chun from China's National Climate Center, it has to do with a subtropical high-pressure system over the northwestern Pacific that was stronger than usual this year. He said the system's intersection with cold air has led to continuous heavy rainfall in the Yangtze River basin.
Yeah, that's the cause. Normal high pressure and low pressure systems, and in fact the jet streams, have been seriously messed up. What we're used to from those systems, you can get issues like China had automatically, naturally, they can occur. But the heating effect of the atmosphere and the supersaturation of moisture in the atmosphere is very much so causing a change in atmospheric jet streams and much more likely to create heat domes, pressure systems over areas of America and Canada and Siberia that we're not used to seeing. Not for that length of time, not for that intensity.
Climate change needs to be factored in as well. Song said, seeing it over the long term, global warming has led to an increase in the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events.
Any scientist who works for the Chinese government, any reporter that works for the Chinese government, and they all work for the Chinese government, when they actually are saying, yes, climate change has made this deeper, stronger, more often, they should be listened to, because they're not actually keen on this. China and various other parts of the world want to get up to America's level of economic development and growth, and then work hard on greening itself. America is at that level already, but doesn't have enough support from enough people to actually green itself, to actually reduce fossil fuel use. For various reasons, fossil fuels need to be reduced. One of the things climate change denialists are now calling carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is pollution. There is no climate change. Then they said there is climate change, but it's got nothing to do with humans. Humans cannot possibly cause climate change. And now what they're saying is that climate change is a factor like pollution and everything else, and we can spend money and fix it. But to actually stop burning the cause of it would be a bad idea because of economics. And of course they also blame China. That's one of the things people like to do when they're caught out, is when the parents find them and say, hey, you've been burning a lot of carbon. The world's having problems with it. You turn and go, well, China's doing it. It really is pitiful. So I don't have any confidence that governments will do enough to reduce the carbon dioxide burn that all of us are causing, all of us, no matter lifestyles we have. And I don't have any confidence that we won't have runaway climate change. What's worrying me is I think I'm seeing evidence that has been forecast for 2040 to 2050 climate happening in 2021. I find that very disturbing. All I'm doing from this series of videos is trying to get people who either believe or disbelieve science to actually take a hard look at where their locations are and to mitigate and to harden it.
Song added that over the past 60 years, the number of days of heavy rain has gone up by nearly 4% every decade.
Song's talking about China. China's pretty big. It's still got weather, but it actually has a lot of climate effects because of its size, same as North America, same as Canada, same as Russia. But a country like the United Kingdom would not have climate, they have weather. And the climate may have altered their weather, but what they're experiencing is weather. What China's experiencing here is climatic change. They've actually been able to document that as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has risen, the amount of water has risen as well. And that's because the water's risen and it drops. Rain is rising, and it's rising on a steady rate. So what you can say from this quite firmly is, maybe it will continue to rise. Maybe it will continue to rise at the same rate, maybe it will rise at a lower rate. What I would say, looking at the data, is no, the rainfall they're having that's been rising will continue to rise in amount. So it won't be a steady progression, it will be like this. we're in for some really bad weather.
In addition to climate change, human activities in China are blamed for making floods more severe. Decades of land reclamation and dam building have reduced the area and volume of lakes and rivers, reducing the amount of water they can store before they burst their banks.
This, of course, is absolutely true. Paving, concrete, asphalt.
And we started to urbanize, which means we were building our homes and our stores. And all of those things are built with hard surfaces. And we call those impervious surfaces, which means water cannot get through that surface. So it's nice and hard.
Absolutely gives the ground less ability to soak up rainfall, and the more rainfall that's falling, and it's falling more, it actually will pool and move. And storm drains are designed for this type of flooding event from rain, and it's the same the world over. So if you have a garden, you should be considering putting grass and trees down on that garden. Preferably, I would say fruit and nut trees so you can feed yourself if things go really bad, but you should not be putting asphalt down. Where I live, there's a whole bunch of people who have cars, and they have 2 to 5 cars a house, and they drive back and forth about 30-40 kilometers each day rather than use transit infrastructure, and they put asphalt and concrete down absolutely everywhere, so they don't have to bother cutting the grass. And I think it's a really interesting fact. If enough people did what me and Kitty did and put down gravel that can soak through, it can actually make the area look more attractive. But that's just my personal opinion. You can do a little bit to mitigate the amount of flooding that's likely to happen in your local area. The problem is you cannot mitigate the effects of a city 10 to 20 kilometers upstream.
China has always had to cope with flooding. One of the country's worst known floods was in 1931, when more than 2 million people died.
Of course, there's always been floods, there's always been ice storms, there's always been pandemics. What is interesting this year in 2021 about the effects of climate directly affecting the weather systems that we're experiencing, the weather events we've experienced, is that for the first time ever, human scientists have actually been able to figure out what percentage of the event is caused by, or likely to have been caused by, human activity in the past by burning fossil fuels. For example, Linton and parts of California and Oregon, their temperatures went up by an extra 2 centigrade. They reckon, purely because of the effects of human activity over the last decades. It's worse than that because that human activity actually created the conditions, or made the conditions much more likely to exist, that actually caused the heat dome in the first place. And then it made the heat dome last much longer than it would generally, naturally, in a natural cycle last.
A more recent catastrophic flood was along the Yangtze River in 1998, when over 3,000 people were killed. After that disaster, Beijing increased spending on flood defenses. Reservoirs were built to try and tame major rivers, inducing the mighty Yangtze, where the huge Three Gorges Dam started construction in 1994.
We ain't going to big engineer our way out of this. I mean, you can put a big wall around Manhattan, I guess, and spend trillions of dollars maintaining that wall. But at some point, the water that should have inundated Manhattan is going to inundate the Bronx. So if you actually protect a specific area from artificially high rainfall because of human-caused climate change, that water will move elsewhere. So it's not something you can easily do. You can specifically, you can protect various parts of your infrastructure, but to actually protect huge geographical areas pretty much won't be possible. Now, it was thought that it could be done, and we have spent trillions upon trillions of dollars all across the planet building massive dams and various other things to do this, and now we're going,
But scientists have questioned whether massive dams can effectively control flooding downstream. Last week, after the water level rose more than 15 meters, or 50 feet above flood level, 3 floodgates of the Three Gorges Dam were opened, while elsewhere, soldiers were testing embankments and strengthening them with sandbags and rocks. On July 19th, authorities in central China blasted a dam on a tributary of the Yangtze River to release surging waters.
you need more and more soldiers and more sandbags the further down the river you get to actually try and stop the water going bang. It's interesting, a lot of Chinese cities and a lot of American cities actually are on the coasts with river systems behind them because that's how we used transport before we flew and had trucks. It's a problem. And think about it. Think about the river systems in any area you live. Where are the major population centres? Not exclusively, but the majority of the major cities of the world are on the coastal areas with massive rivers behind them.
Cities further downstream have been spared so far, but on the banks of the rain-swollen Yangtze River lies Wuhan, a city still reeling from its experience earlier this year as the world's first epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic. Wuhan is now on high alert for another reason, amid fears that the nearby waterways will continue to rise, bringing more hardship.
Yeah, Wuhan. And the issue is, for me, is at the end of the day, whether you accept or disbelieve science, whether you have convinced yourselves from watching YouTube videos and listening to specific politically motivated and financed by big oil corporations information, the planet is getting hotter as we've released more and more carbon dioxide. The question is, are we actually at a tipping point? And has the tipping point been tipped? I think quite clearly the tipping point may have been tipped. I'm hoping we have a normal winter, very, very much across this planet. We have to have eyes on the Rocky Mountains this winter and the Cascades and everywhere else in the States. If they get 20% of their snowfall like they did last year, we're in for a whole world of pain in 2022. There's going to be major droughts, there's going to be major floods, there's going to be major disruptions to our normal lifestyle. Our normal lifestyle is very much not part of the natural cycle, and we do know that individual preps can be done to mitigate flooding and other events, and I will probably do some videos of that at some point, but I'm hoping you lot do. I'm hoping people out there, whether you believe in climate change science or not, what are your actual plans in place in case of a massive catastrophic flash flood event? What plans do you have in place? We did some videos which were great on drought, because that's definitely part of this. It's a two-edged sword, this one. What are your plans for flash flooding? Is it just the bug out bag and then you're going to be a refugee and you're going to hope your friends and family look after you and the government looks after you? Or do you have better things in place? Have you actually done things like put valves into your sewer line so it won't back up? I mean, people say, oh, it won't back up because it's never backed up. And that's very much of a human bias. If you get a 1 in 1,000 or 1 in a 10,000 year flood event, your toilets might start throwing up poop all over the spot. I hope that doesn't happen to you. Well, that's all from me. Not a very happy topic, but I think it's a topic we need to look at increasingly as we go forward. There's always been SHTF events, there's always been natural catastrophes. That's one of the reasons a lot of us prep. What we need to do now is to make sure our preps are at a higher value and a higher level for threats that may in the past not have seemed that bad. I had an F2 tornado touch down 20 miles from me last week. I didn't really take tornado events seriously, certainly not in the F2 range. We got an F2 down, doesn't stop us getting F3 or F4 and dropping right where I live. I need to take those sort of things seriously, even though I don't live in California, even though I don't live in Kansas. If you live in California, you might want to start really having a hard look at what a severe snow event and ice storm would mean for the LA basin. We can't just say geography makes us safe anymore. The climate has changed, whether you think it's the moon wobbling or magnetic fields or space lasers or we burned far too much carbon dioxide for the planet to cope with without heating up. Whatever the reason you think or don't think, the climate doesn't care. The climate has changed and it's coming for you. Get prepped up, have a good look at mitigation, especially areas where you don't agree politically. If you politically think that science is a political thing and that climate change is a big hoax to get taxes off you or get your guns or whatever, I believe wrong. You believe you're correct and you have the evidence for that and you'll probably shove it in my comments section down here. I don't care. What's your preps for flash flooding in your local area? A flash flood that involves the major river system in your area. A flash flood that involves all the river systems and lakes in a 500-mile kilometre area of where you live. I think worst case here, we can prep up a little bit for worst case. We're going to be in a much better mental place if worst case happens, and I hope it doesn't. If you like this video, consider giving me a subscription because it absolutely is vital to you that I keep doing these high quality videos. And on which topic, if you want to send me some checks, I absolutely would be great. I'd like to have a TV studio built, and if you send me your money, that will help. I don't care. Thumbs up, thumbs down, tell me why, have a great day, enjoy life, don't get too bent out of shape about this stuff. It can be depressing for those of us that have been looking at this for years to see the actuality occurring, because bearing in mind we actually kind of have figured out by science and forecasting what comes next. And what comes next, if the science is correct, is not pretty. Toodles! This was a 2021 Prepper Dog production.